Foundation. The ECRDC provides economic development, transportation, and community development planning services in Pine, Isanti, Chisago, Kennebec, and Mille Lacs counties. Tonight we are partnering with the Broadband Foundation to host a regional legislative roundtable on the broadband internet issue. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this very important event. We have area legislators who are here as well, and we so thank you that you are here. We're going to be recognizing you no doubt later. But right now, let's move ahead and move to introduce Mr. Bill Coleman of Community Technology Advisors. He has worked closely with the Broadband Foundation and other stakeholders to identify ways to improve broadband speed and connectivity in our region. We have a packed agenda tonight, so let's get things started. Bill, take it over, please.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. This is a great turnout, and it's nice it warmed up to a balmy, teens now that all the visitors are gone. So that was quite a week in the Twin Cities. And it's interesting, at the next state broadband task force meeting, about half of the task force meeting is going to be the big companies talking about all the internet broadband improvements that they've put into the downtown area, the Mall of America, and so on, so that all these visitors could be served and they could do all this cool technology stuff, and all these marketing gurus and the television stations and everyone using all this connectivity. And then the next speaker at the task force meeting is somebody talking about some wireless technologies that doesn't really even meet the state broadband goal for rural. And so that's our challenge in rural Minnesota, is to make sure that you have the connectivity in greater Minnesota that that people in the metro area have. Because connectivity now is one of the most important things when people or when companies are deciding to make investments. And that's really economic development, isn't it? Getting people and companies to make investments in your area, whether it's your own people or people from the outside, to create a sustainable future for the community. So today, we're going to start off tonight with a quick round of introductions of everyone in the room. It's a big crowd. So I'm going to ask you in less than 1 minute to say kind of your name, and if you have a title like township board or county commissioner or business person, whatever that is. And just a quick thing, what's your broadband story? A lot of people say, well, I spend $300 a month on cellular connections to so I can work from home, or I tried this, I tried that. We don't need any really long-winded. I do that. So quick introductions, and let's move around the room. But it's great to hear where you're from and your broadband story. So Jim, I'm going to start with you, and let's hear your broadband story.
So I'm Jim Swenson, North Branch City Council and city representing for 10,000 population in Chisago County. I got lots of broadband stories, but I keep it short. First, I was at the Super Bowl. I won tickets this week, so I was there. So anyway, our story is in North Branch. We've got a 36 square mile area of people, so we have rural and city involved in it, and so we have all kinds of things. So we're working together as a community to try to find out what we can do to come together to get one or two companies to come there to will be the best effort for all of us.
Your minute's about up now. Your minute's about up now.
Yep, and I'm just going to get by with that and say that we're really working on it, and also tomorrow night at caucus we have both Republican and Democrats that are going to bring up as the #1 issue for North Branch is broadband.
Great, thanks. Ben?
And my minute got used up. Welcome to the meeting, and I'll enjoy listening to everything.
Ann?
Hi, I'm Ann Tracy, and I help with the Blend and on Broadband blog, so my job is to collect the stories.
Okay. Dave, we'll go to you.
Dave Minke, Pine County Administrator. Commissioner Hallen, I think later in the meeting is going to give a Pine County story, so I'll pass on.
Ken Camilleri, Pine City Administrator. Our City Council member, Brian Chalene, he probably has a better story than I do, so I'll just
Okay.
Everybody's passing now. I'm Karen Amundsen. I'm with the Mora Area Chamber of Commerce and also the ECRDC here in Mora, representing Caneva County. But I just noticed I find a lot of businesses that are in great need of high-speed internet. I also hear from people who call who moved up here from Woodbury and other parts of the city, and they don't have high-speed internet where they live, and they've got businesses in their homes, you know, and they're complaining, and it's like, well, you should have known. But we need to have it up here, obviously. So, and also personally, I'd like to have it in my home, a faster internet. So it's just, we're in great dire need.
My name's Chuck Ackman. I'm on Senator Klobuchar's staff. I'm one of 3 regional directors for her. I am her Southern Minnesota regional guy, and I know I'm not Southern Minnesota right now. Ida Rukavina is the regional director in this part of the state. Ida couldn't make it, so I pulled up. I am also the senator's broadband guy, so I was the logical guy to fill in.
Hi, I'm Mark Johnson. I'm the executive director of ECMEC, which is a cooperative of 14 school districts in our area, including all of them in Kanabec and Pine and Chisago and Mille Lacs and so on counties, Isanti. Of course, broadband is awfully important to us in education. We have students both in the cities and in the rural areas, and the disparity in the region among what those students have for access is incredible, and that's a problem for us. I've also been working with the Kanabec Broadband Initiative since 2011 as we've been working to help some of the stories that care there.
Thank you.
Jason Rarick, I'm the state representative for Pine County and Kanabec County, and I'm here to kind of learn what the situations are so I can see what my office can do to help get the funding out into our rural areas.
Tom Anderson, clerk for Bradford Township, Isanti County. We don't have high-speed access.
I'm Greg Anderson, Isanti County Commissioner, and the Isanti County Commissioners have decided to move forward with a broadband initiative. So the company was hired to complete a feasibility study. We have a draft report of the feasibility study that we've been provided by the Design 9 company that the county contracted with to complete that study. Part of it was a survey that was completed, and we had a high response on the survey from residents and businesses, and the percentages are close to 90% of residents, I think it's 87, 88%, are not satisfied with their internet services.
Thank you.
I'm Bob Sundstrom with Oklahoma Township. In Pine County, we don't have access at our town hall, but there is internet access that gets fed by Centrelink out of Danbury, Wisconsin, that comes over to our side. So I use the internet service that I have coming to my house. But I have noticed the last 6 months that the internet service is slowing down and slowing down and slowing down, even though that they say it's DSL and it's high speed. So yeah, there's times that you can't open a page for 5 minutes, and it gets to be really frustrating.
I hear you there. Sir?
Me, I'm Paul Norford, and I'm from Cambridge, Isanti County EDA. And I'm an enthusiast. I'm a good student.
Dave Osmond, Isanti County Commissioner, and I think Greg told you what our situation.
Doyle Jelsing, Canadian County EDA, and also KBI, Canadian Broadband. We've been struggling, as Mark said, since 2011 to find some suitable resource and access, and we are still struggling.
Sir?
Kevin Hofstad, not representing anyone except myself. We have a law office in Pine City and one in North Branch, and in connection with joining those two offices together, we struggled mightily to get sufficient bandwidth and speed to have the virtual office capacity that we were looking for. So that was my first situation. The second one is I live in rural Pine County, quite frequently. And in the process of trying to figure out what was available for broadband, contacted Jordan Zeller and asked him what's happening with broadband in East Central Minnesota. And he said, come to the meeting tonight and find out.
Good.
That's what I'm
Welcome. And you know, it's interesting, you know, as so many people work from home, work from an office, so on, and especially now, law offices or banks or whatever, this idea that everything is in the cloud. You know, you have multiple offices, all that information is held some other place many times. And if you can't get it, you can't work. Sir?
Marshall Lynn, City of Graham, City Planner. The city did put broadband into our industrial park, but basically it's pretty much that's about it. A little bit downtown, but the rest of the city doesn't have it.
In Bacon, North Bend Township, we have a broadband that's actually pretty slow internet. It's no high speed at all.
Ron Benderson, North Branch Township.
Rick Mink, Chicago County Commissioner. We have two townships that are putting broadband in, direct grants. I'll let Nancy elaborate on it.
Good. Dana?
Dana Kennedy with the Office of Broadband Development.
Welcome.
Nancy Hoffman, Chisago County HRA EDA, and we've been working on broadband for a few years now. First trying to figure out what the issues are and hear from our community, and then meeting up with the providers to see how we can work with them. Working with a variety of providers is difficult. It's difficult to find a one-size-fits-all. So as Rick said, we've been fortunate in a couple of Centrelink areas to receive some broadband. I work from home, and I can speak personally. I'm upset with having high bills that I've paid for broadband, for DirecTV, for paying my cell phone, and I'm fortunately one of those residents that I'm going to have fiber to the home pretty soon, and I'm extremely excited about that. I wish we could get it across and the region.
I'm Carrie Tripp with the Initiative Foundation. We cover the 14-county area, which obviously includes this area. We hear all the time between business, economic development growth, and just helping communities and the issue of broadband.
I'm Kyle Vanderpool. I'm on Senator Tina Smith's staff and her regional office director here in Northeast Minnesota. This is the number one issue that we hear throughout this Northeast region. And I grew up on Iron Ridge. I don't think there's a single Iron Ridge that has a positive broadband story. But I was also going to bring up Bree Mackey, who is my southern Minnesota counterpart. She's also our state telecommunications and broadband expert. But yesterday her daughter tore her ACL, so she's taking care of her today, so you're stuck with me.
Well, welcome. Thank you.
My name is Kirsten Fury, and I'm the editor at the Caneva County Times, the local newspaper here. And my husband and I moved to Mora 5 years ago, and we bought our first home. And more important than the number of bathrooms that it had was if it had internet connection. We bought the home thinking we had called Centrelink and do you connect this address? They said, yeah, sure. Bought the home, and they didn't. So every 6 months since then, we're like, God, should we sell? Do we need to move? And thankfully, this last expansion of Centrelink did service us, but it's something, but it's still not ideal.
70% of people now will not buy a home unless it has quality internet. Just think of that if you think about you're trying to sell your property. 70% of the people, if you don't have internet, aren't interested. So that's slicing off a big part of the marketplace. Richard?
Richard Baker. I'm a resident of Spencer Brook Township in Isani County and live in a rural housing subdivision. And I'm active with the GPS 4593 broadband committee. And as far as our broadband goes, last time I checked, it's 13 down and like 0.7 or 0.8 up. But we do have fiber a half mile from our house, and they're touting 40, I think, for the down speeds now for mid-post. And made that extra purchase there.
Susan Morris, Isani County Commissioner, and my big story story, I think, is I've been a commissioner for 11 years, and the calls that now outweigh the road complaints, the internet complaints go way above the road complaints. So that's kind of like my marker of, boy, this is really the scale of importance of people's lives.
You know, it's interesting when you think about, you know, if you got a bad road or they don't plow very good, you can always get a bigger truck, right? But if you can't create your own broadband now, so that's the challenge. And we have I did some work for the GPS 45 group, and Nancy Hoffman was kind enough to bring some copies of a little report I did for that group. We don't have enough for anyone, so for everyone, I should say. And so maybe I'll just leave them up here at the front table, or maybe Jordan will put them on the back table, and so people can grab them on their way out if they're really interested. We can also put them on, yes.
Yes.
We can also make more copies of that as we go. Jana, we missed your group, I know.
We missed that one.
Yep, okay.
Jenna King, I'm an economic development consultant with St. County, and have been working closely with the county on the study that Greg referenced, and I'll get from there.
John Paulson, clerk in Knife Lake Township, northwest of Mora. Just a personal story. DishNet is a big improvement over dial-up, and that's kind of where we were. So I didn't realize it was, would you say, Doyle, 2011? I was at 2 or 3 of the first meetings here, and nothing's really happened since then. So it's where we're at in the township as well.
Thanks. Commissioner?
Steve Holland, Pine County Commissioner. And I've been involved with this. We were trying to figure that out. You might have been at those meetings in about 1999 in Pine City. I almost think it was then that everybody in the county would get internet. And I'm with Susan. The number one thing that when I go to a coffee shop or when my phone rings that I get a complaint about is when heck are you going to do something about internet? And it's frustrating. I happen to be a fortunate soul who's got really good internet. And I live on the end of the line of Midway. And my neighbors that live 200 yards across the field from me can't even get good cell phone service. And when I walk to the east end of my farm, I live a mile and a half from town, my cell phone, so if you're relying on a Verizon hotspot, you're screwed. That's the basic, that's how we do. And if you live where Fran Levy lives or the guys in Ogama, you're double screwed.
Brian Shalin, Pine City City Council. I was in with Steve on some of those early explorations back in the late 1990s. And we've been working relatively steadily, not all the time, but working toward that goal for the whole time since then. And actually, by cooperation between the city and the county and the schools and Midco, we have really quite good internet service within the city limits of Pine City. You can get pretty much whatever speed you want at a reasonable speed, very good service. The unfortunate thing is, as Steve said, you don't have to go very far outside the city limits and you've got nothing. And we always get people complaining to the city council about not having broadband options. And when we do, it always turns out that they don't really live in Pine City. They live outside of the city limits and just think they live in Pine City. But then I got to tell this one other little story. I was in Cambodia about a year and a half ago, and we were out in this rural area where nobody had electric power except the little carts would bring around your storage battery once a day, a charged storage battery, so that they could watch TV in their huts. And we were in the middle of a really big lake, and I had super fast LTE on my cell phone getting like 40 megs download in the middle of a big lake in a very primitive country. So I'm always kind of appalled that we can't be up to that standard here.
Thank you.
Mike Miller with the Minnesota Association of Townships District 7. So I'm just soaking it in so I can talk to our representatives to get them going.
Good. Broadband is the #1 topic at the legislature for the Association of Townships again this year.
And I'm Senator Mark Curran. I represent Senate District 32, most of Chisago County, most of Isani County. You'll be comforted. I also live in the technology desert. I have no high speed available. I'm stuck with Centrelink, who won't even provide low-grade DSL, even though they claim they serve our area. And so I'm stuck with the very expensive satellite and/or hotspot. It's expensive, slow, and limited. It's throttled after the capacities are reached. So I'm getting ready to start my second year. The thing that was shocking to me, because we are a bedroom community out of just a little bit south of the city of North Branch. We're a bedroom community, and I think all of us are in a pretty similar boat that we need to upgrade the capacities for internet to keep the residents we have, more or less attract new residents. It's a telecommuter or work from home, and I'm one of those who work from home, and we have so many businesses in our community. Some of them we even know about that depend upon real good high-speed internet. I was shocked though when I got to the Capitol to realize that there's absolutely no plan statewide, and so to fight for dollars, believe me, I have the greatest interest to fight for as many dollars as possible. I think it's as important as our road infrastructure today. It really is. But yet with no plan, it makes it very difficult to fight for more when you have no idea what the cost is. So that's what I'm hoping. I'm glad to see the great participation, and I'm hoping that there's some economies of scale that we can get if we start to build out a bigger county-by-county plan or something with a larger scale than the one-off townships that we have working today. So you have my complete support.
Good, thanks for coming. Sir?
Yeah, Eric Levan, I'm the supervisor with Sunrise Township in Chisago County. We have a very robust fiber network now. It's about 66% of the township. And that was entirely through partnership with Nancy at the Chisago County EDA, Centrelink, our citizens in Minnesota grant program. What's interesting about our township is it's divided by two providers. We have Frontier and Centrelink. And when the deal finally went through, we got the fiber put in. Frontier wasn't far behind to put fiber in the node. And so then our residents on the Frontier side have now gotten faster internet as well. So it sort of spurred that competition between the two providers, which I think was kind of an unexpected benefit at the time. We're kind of just here to offer our knowledge from what we've gained in the process.
Kevin?
I'm just saying. Fiber optic.
Kevin Van Hooser, Isani County Administrator. As has been mentioned already tonight, we're nearing the end of completing our feasibility study. Part of that feasibility study was a survey, and I'm quite sure my phone number must have been on that survey because I got so many phone calls with stories just like we're hearing tonight. Just like all these just came out of the woodwork, all these people trying to telecommute, trying to get some businesses going, and the stories are plentiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Tony Ori, I represent the eastern side of Kanabec County, all of Pine County, all of Carlton County, a little chunk of St. Louis too, just for good measure. I live in deep rural Carrick. I served on a town board for 9 years before I made it to the Senate, and I've been really glad to see the townships really take an active interest in this. I mean, everybody's telling their personal stories. I ran some small businesses out of our region and worked out of my home in an IT environment for quite a few years as well before going to the legislature, and know the struggle very well. I'm in a frontier territory, and to tell you the truth, they were actually really good early on. They came early in with DSL that worked pretty well for a while, and then the line So, yeah, I'm stuck with the large bill and in quite limited service, and know that it's going to take a significant public investment and commitment to have that investment available for locals to make the plans. I don't know that there's going to be a big statewide plan. I think there's going to have to be locals getting together like this. This is a really impressive group coming together, and I think it really speaks volumes about how much this means to everyone across our communities. And so if we can come up with local plans and the state can have the matching dollars to see those come to life, I think that's probably one of the best ways to go. So I'll look forward to learning more about what other people's experiences is, and learn about how we can engage fruitfully at the legislature and provide that the matching funds to really jumpstart these and make it to that last mile up to Fran's place later.
Good deal. Thank you.
I'm Carrie Ann Allman. I'm with the Municipal Association of Townships. I'm communication and outreach for them. I'm actually from Itasca County, so I live in Itasca County, and I came down from St. Michael for work, or St. Paul. I'm a lobbyist for the association, and this is one of our top 5. The last couple of weeks, all I have done is been in St. Paul or been in the different districts, meeting with senators and representatives. This morning I was at the Three River Falls meeting with 3. I'm in 3 in Bemidji Wednesday, and then I'm on the southern part of the state all next week. So it's something that everybody at the legislature is hearing about, wanting that we are moving forward because it still needs to be funded for this year, or it's going to go away this year. So there's a lot of buzz about it this year, especially the legislative. And 2 senators that I've been trying to get hold of, but
Here they are.
I'm going to pinpoint them tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's a Lakeland Township Supervisor. We're about the same boat. We got their 30% there covered in the west.
Pat Holman, County Administrator, Knox County, and our county is outside the city areas. There's quite a bit of frustration in the rural areas with broadband options, cost, and levels of service. And we're best to address that, which I'll be talking about.
Good. Thank you.
Beth Carl from Rosa Township. Needless to say, we're in Centrelink. Telephone don't work, so how's the computer?
My name is Fran Levings, and I'm from Nosy Township, which is way up in the northeastern corner of Pine County, right on the Wisconsin border. 2 years ago, we had a man come down from Duluth, and he connected the town hall up with the internet. So we're okay at the town hall, but the rest of the township is pretty bereft, so I'm here to learn about it.
Thank you.
I'm Rick Olsteen. I work for Congressman Nolan, and I cover the Pick'em counties for him. So I work in Pine, Isanti, Chisago, Kanabec, and Mille Lacs. And the same story that everybody's been telling tonight. That's kind of the world we live in. And so, but if you look at the 8th congressional district as a map, the broadband office did a map, and red is underserved, and like 95% of the 8th district is underserved. So Congressman Nolan has introduced a bill. He's introduced a few bills on broadband, kind of like rural electrification. How did they get electricity out here 75, 80 years ago? Maybe that's a model we can use for getting broadband out. So now we just got to find the money, right? So.
Thanks, Rick.
And I'm Bob Voss. I'm the Executive Director at the East Central Regional Development Commission. We've recognized that the broadband availability is a huge barrier, has been a huge barrier for economic development in our region. So that's why we're convening evenings like tonight to bring more awareness to it and try and marshal the resources that we might be able to. So we appreciate everybody coming this evening. I think my board members are here this evening and have shown a great interest in that as well. So.
Good. Thanks a lot. think it's important for us to hear from each other that this isn't just your problem or your problem over here. This is really a shared regional issue. And the idea of going at it at a regional level or at the county level, you know, I know there's 9 or 10 townships in Chisago County. You know, Pine County probably has 30 townships. So township by township is a tough way to go. And so the more we can do together as a region, the better we are. I just want to, I'm lucky enough in my consulting work to work a lot with the Blandon Foundation, but I'm not the Blandon Foundation. So a lot of times my name tag I actually write not the Blandon Foundation. And people have stopped asking me for money, which is kind of nice. But the Blandon Foundation does provide a lot of technical assistance and support to communities. And so Mille Lacs and Isanti and Kanabec counties have all received some grants to do some feasibility study work, but they're also part of our, I won't say this about Isanti yet, but Mille Lacs and Kanabec, we've got a group of communities that have done feasibility studies, but you really need someone to dance with in terms of who will partner with you to work on this, unless you just want to try and do it yourself as a government entity, which is certainly possible and legal and done in places. But most county commissioners, township officials, the last thing they actually want to do is be a telecommunications provider. And so finding a partner tends to make things go a little easier because it's a pretty complicated business. So what's at stake here today? Broadband fun facts. Recently reaffirmed by the FCC now is that the definition of broadband is 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up. And so there was a push to have that reduced to 10 megabits down and 1 up. Luckily, that was pushed aside, and I reaffirmed that. Know that anything less than 25 down and 3 up is just not broadband anymore. It's not high-speed broadband, it's not broadband. So when people talk, oh, I get 10 megabits down and 1 up, that's internet service, but it's not broadband, according to the FCC. And they also reaffirmed that mobile broadband, a Wi-Fi hotspot from Verizon or AT&T, doesn't really meet the needs of a family either. So those are two really important things. Know that that standard went up 30-fold in 8 years, between 2008 and 2016, from less than 1 megabit to 25 megabits. But no, that's far behind what's happened in the marketplace. It used to be that a 5 meg connection, 10 meg was pretty good. Now there's places in Minneapolis neighborhoods where you can get a 10 gigabit connection at your residence from Little US Internet, the company that was spurred on by the city of Minneapolis investment in city Wi-Fi. That kind of faded away, but that company used that network build to start delivering gigabit level services for under $100. So it's not only faster by far, it's cheaper than what almost everyone in this room is paying. Comcast just announced that they've increased everyone's speed by 50 megabits. So if you had a 100 meg connection, now it's 150. I'm sure the price will be raised at some point, but it wasn't raised this month. But it's the idea that this is just this bandwidth now should be like electricity. That it's not a question that, oh, can I plug in this hairdryer while I'm making toast, right? We don't think about that very much. If you do, call an electrician. But at least you can solve that. It's probably not the electrical company's problem. And so this is now this age of bandwidth plenty in rural areas have big limitations on that. Know that families use about 250 gigabytes of data per month. And I was up in Bemidji talking to a northern Minnesota rural electric co-op that's thinking about getting into the broadband. And I put that up there and they said, oh, some guy, I can't, I've got a 30 gig plan and that works fine for me. Just then, and I didn't set this up, person at the room, their phone dinged, and it was their cable company, and they had just exceeded their 350 gigabyte data cap. And she says, I just know there's 7 kids sitting on my couch. Because it was like the first week of summer vacation, and they had been texting and videos and all those kind of things. Know that average family now has 13 devices that connect to the internet, and moving to 50 devices per household by 2022. You think, well, what could that be? It's medical devices, it's things on your well, it's things on your furnace, things on your septic tank, it's on your multiple TVs, it's all that. This is something new that we're showing. It's a digital divide index, and it was created by a professor at Purdue, Roberto Gallardo, and dark colors are bad. You want a low digital divide index, which means that you have high levels of connectivity, and then some social factors of income and education and age that show kind of where this innovation society is really going to happen. And so I know you're familiar with your areas. Chisago's that's best here in this area. It's the second lowest category, but everything else is dark red in the highest digital divide areas. These areas across the country that are in the dark colors, population loss, business loss, workforce loss. The places in the light yellow, population growth, business formation, higher incomes. So we're now really starting to see what happens to areas that are disconnected. We know that rural Minnesota as a whole has higher levels of low-income people and older people, things that contribute to higher digital divide issues. But the lack of that connectivity is a magnifying glass on your economic future. This shows these communities here, the lowest digital divide index, average population growth across the country, 5%, 3.7% workforce growth. Over on this side, negative 1.9 and negative 2.6. So you want to be winning, right? When you think about broadband, it's not just about the speed anymore. It's not just the download speed that most people advertise. It's the upload speed. It's the reliability. We hear from a lot of people that having unreliable internet is almost worse than having no internet at all. Because once you start relying on it, and it's not there when you need it, when your kid needs to send their homework in at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night, it has to be in by midnight, they're in trouble. The latency, all the satellite users in here, it takes a lot of time to get up to the satellite and back down. So you can't do Skype with it, you can't do video conferencing, you can't do online banking in many cases because the Norwest Bank or U.S. Wells Fargo, whoever, they said something's wrong with that connection, we're terminating that, that's just not right. How could it be that slow? So they turn you off. Mobility, obviously, people like to be connected all the time. And so having their phones or iPads, that's really important. Not discounting the importance of wireless at all. It's critical, but the average, your wireless signal here, if you're on this Wi-Fi network in this room, it goes out to the hallway to a wireless router connected to probably fiber optics. And that's the same thing with a cellular connection, cellular hotspot. It's only going wireless for a very short period of time. And so that's the important thing there. And then affordability, and especially in the East Central region, a fair number of people with lower than average incomes. So what good does it do that say, well, we have internet, but it's $200 a month if people can't afford it, and so on. So this is really, when you're assessing your county's broadband, things to think about there. This is a state border-to-border grant program map. Red means stop, green means go. Red is the area that's eligible for the grant. So lots of, we're eligible for the grant. Well, that means you're underserved or unserved. And so you can see a lot of red here. You can also see large areas now of rural Minnesota that are green. That means they have at least 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up in a wired connection. And so you're competing for people who want to live rural. But if I live up here, I can work for Best Buy, I can work for United Health Group, I can work for anyone, even though I'm 200 miles farther away from them than you are. You can't work for them because you don't have a connection that matches that. When we talk about St. Louis County, they've got some great employers in the Duluth area, United Health, Delta Dental, Delta Airlines. They love telecommuters, teleworkers. But you can't do that on a cellular connection. You can't work with them on a satellite connection. And so you're telling people they can't really get a job unless you have that. Here's your region. So you can see in the towns, you know, Midco's a nice cable company and internet provider. But they want, before they'll come into an area, expand out 8 houses per road mile. Right? So they want, you know, going down that street, 8 houses on that side of the street. Well, how many people live in rural townships that have that, right? It's a lot less dense population than that. Some people have driveways that are longer than that, right? So this is a challenge. They're not coming out. They may go out, you know, to around Fish Lake here, south of Mora, where there's population centers, where you have that density. But they'll, you know, pick their marketplace to do that. This is your region, how you compare to the rest of rural Minnesota. Here's your rank at the 25 megabit category. Chisago is your winner, 63rd out of 78. The other counties are worse. Pine, 82, Kanabec, 84. Then you get down here, you can see for 20, this is percent wireline. Oh, this is your rank, and then this is your percentage coverage for 100 meg, and then for a gigabit. 15% of rural Minnesota now has gigabit level service available. That's not a huge number, but it beats yours. 0.2 in Isanti. Who is that? A county? That must be one of the county commissioners. Got it. But the, you know, so that's 0.02 is your winner. That's not very good. And especially as the state broadband grants are distributed, you know, they fund projects that have to be scalable to 100 megs. And most of them, when they're funded, are able to deliver that 100 megs. And if you're able to deliver 100, you can deliver a gigabit. So that's it's just a matter of the technology. Know that the technology challenges, we know all of them are getting better. Satellite is better than it was. Cellular hotspots are better than they were. But they're not getting faster, better than these wired technologies. Some people talk about 5G wireless. You have to be within 1,000 feet of that radio to get 5G. There's plenty of 5G now in downtown Minneapolis by the Super Bowl. There's not really even a standard yet for 5G, but it's really fast wireless stuff connected to fiber. We know that in rural areas, 4G, even 3G wireless can be, you know, some places are 2 and 3 generations behind. You know, if you can't carry a phone call, you can't, you know, we have people standing, we have all kinds of stories of people standing, you know, hanging off the side of their silos trying to get a cell connection, or standing on rocks. When they say unlimited data plans, sure, they'll keep your data coming, but it slows to a trickle. It's that throttling that we heard about. Satellite, we talked about latency. The same thing on the data plans, unlimited. And then the fixed wireless. You know, there's one really good thing about living out in western Minnesota. You know, the prairie where the wind blows and there's no hills or trees. Wireless works really good out there. They got, you know, it's a grain economy, so they got towns every 7 miles along railroad tracks. They got water towers and grain legs and all kinds of stuff. You can put radios up on there. And if those radios are connected by fiber, very close to the source, you can get 50 megabit symmetrical connections now that are pretty good. They're not, there's no latency, it's pretty reliable. But trees eat wireless, so you've got a few of those in Pine County, for example, right? named it after the tree that eats wireless. So, so that's kind of the technology challenges of the day. We heard a little bit about Centrelink and Frontier improving services. And they've received funds from the federal government to improve those services, a program called Connect America Fund 2. We call that CAF 2. Requires at least a 10 down, 1 up minimum connection. And that's what the federal government required. When they started their program, federal standard for broadband was 4 down and 1 up. In between, they moved it up to 25, so they kind of compromised on this 10 down and 1 up. So if you're, there's no requirement for them to serve everyone. They can kind of, Centrelink has a certain number of households across the state that they have to hit with that CAF money, but they could serve half a township over here, down this road over there. Not the kind of ubiquitous service that you'd certainly want if you're doing a telecommunications plan. Within 3,000 feet, you can get 25 megabits or better, depending on the technology they use. And about 10,000 feet from those electronics, now you're down to about 10 megabits. Know that if your phone doesn't work when it rains, it crackles and dings and makes funny noises, that kind of means your copper lines are old. And many of the copper lines in rural America are old. So they're, this graph here shows, this is in kilometers, so 1 kilometer, that's about 3,000 feet. You're at about 30 megabits per second or so at 1 kilometer. At 3 kilometers, again, you're down to that 10 megabits. That's 10,000 feet or so. And that's kind of in the lab conditions. That's not out in northern Mille Lacs County. So I did this study in the last few months. And I looked at 2 different exchanges, Lindstrom and Bram. One is Centrelink, the second one, Bram, is Centrelink, and this is Frontier. And so the blue circles are 9,000 foot radius, the red circles are 3,000 foot radius. I tell you, Centrelink and Frontier neither chose to comment. I gave them opportunity to comment. And so I also asked a lot of technologists, people who do this work every day. They said, you're being way too nice to these companies because copper lines don't go as a bird flies. They go down to the corner and they turn left, and then they might turn right, then they might turn left, do a few circles. Right? These phone lines weren't designed to be internet networks, they were designed to be phone company networks. So these are the circles, and that actually looks pretty good, doesn't it? A lot of service. But know that out here you're at about 10 megabits. So if we think about the FCC standard of service, 25.3, that's the Lindstrom exchange that meets the state broadband standard for 2022, or the FCC standard. That doesn't look very good, does it? So one of the issues that a lot of people face is that, okay, I'm a competitive provider, I want to come in here and start delivering service against Frontier. And all that CAF money's been spent. So this kind of discourages other people from coming in and competing. But I say, it's not too bad. How can you compete if somebody came in and delivered gigabit service? How could this compete? So I'm trying to sell it to them. This is Centrelink. This is a little more confusing because Centrelink actually has some old equipment out in the field. I couldn't tell the difference between what's active and not. So I think wherever they have these double circles, I think we've got some old equipment out there. Know that some of these things were, Frontiers was all fiber connected. All their devices were the similar equipment. It was all fiber connected. Some of this in the Bram exchange is fed by copper to these DSL access modules. And so there's Bram as it's now done. So this is, and Jana's going to talk a little bit about the survey that they did in Isani County, and the reflection is of, this was done this year, after, I think done before the survey was complete. Some of these bigger companies, they can install, but they can't sell either. They don't even tell people that the service is improved and improved. So, so That's the CAF2 network. So, and this is my word to the legislators when they come in and say CAF2 will take care of everything. That's their solution. I ask the companies, if you have a better exchange you want me to highlight, if you want to write your own appendix, if you want to show me a different exchange where you've done better or give me an improved map, they chose not to do that. So, fiber investment, is it a good choice? Costs between $4,000 and $12,000 a house out in the rural area, depending on density, soil. You know, Rock County, that was a tough place to do berry fiber. Lake County, Cook County, lots of rocks. That's not good. And so that's why the price is so different. I mentioned about the people want a house. We know that the fiber-connected house is increased in value. So if you're a county commissioner, you say, how are we going to pay for this? Look at these two things. Who wants to move to your county if you don't have broadband? What does that do to pricing? And the flip side of that, if every house in the county was worth $7,000 more, how much more assessed value would you have? So that's two really things. And if I were you, I'd also talk to realtors, because there's a lot of stories where a house on one side of the lake will sell like that. The house that's on the other side but not connected will never sell. Because who especially $300,000 or $400,000 house on a lake, all those people want, you know, that number is probably closer to 100% of the people who can afford to buy a house that's expensive. They're going to want internet service. We know that people who are connected save money. I just have my own story with Anderson Windows. I called them, I have a leaky door, out of warranty. I called them, sent them an email, nothing, no real response. I posted on my Facebook page, I said, well, just got off, I got the silent plight treatment from Anderson Windows, you know, at Anderson Corp. And that means it shows up on their Facebook page. 20 minutes later, I saved myself $300 on a replacement door. I paid my internet for 6 months. And then we just know that there's people in this room elsewhere, they have a DSL connection that works sometimes. Doesn't have a data cap, so they like that. They've got a cellular connection, they got a satellite connection, and they just hope when they need to send something that one of them works. Or they specialize in which connection they use for which different things. People save a lot of money. And we'll hear about Sunrise Township a little bit more from Nancy. People there are going to save hundreds of dollars per month on their internet. What else costs about $10,000? I went on Craigslist. Bunch of 10-year-old stuff. A 10-year-old plain Lund fishing boat. Now it's not even, you know, it doesn't even have a trolling motor on the front. A 10-year-old truck. A lawn tractor. These things cost $10,000. So when you think about a 30-year asset of a fiber network, it's not really that much in the comparison of what you're talking about today. So these are my conclusions, my own personal ones. You need better broadband to reach your potential, and I know your economic development group, GPS 4593, agrees. If people could make money serving rural Pine County with broadband, they would do it. And so it's just like rural electric, it's like rural telephone. They took juice to make that happen, government subsidy. And know that the value that people are going to receive from that is so far exceeds the value of the network. You know, I used to say that, like in a downtown Mora, this was when we were trying to get DSL service in a lot of small towns, that for the bigger companies, 5, 10 DSL connections in a rural community does nothing really for their balance sheet, for their profit and loss statement. But 10 connected businesses in a town, that makes a big difference in their ability to compete and hire people and create a community. We know that the border-to-border broadband fund's an excellent tool, but they received $20 million appropriation last year. That was spent. They had 2.5 times more application in a very short application process last year. That by the time the money was approved, you know, the first grant application deadline to notify providers was like about 3 days later, no, 6 weeks later. But to try and do the planning and get your provider partner takes time. So for the first time now, we have a rural broadband coalition that's formed. We're having the second annual Day on the Hill, April 12th. So I encourage you to put that on your calendar and look at the MinnesotaBroadbandCoalition.com for information about that, because it does take a rural voice. And the beauty now of the Broadband Coalition is that there will be a broadband voice at the Capitol. We've got the partners like the counties and the townships and the cities and the Rural Health Association and so on, education. But you know, in that last 72 hours at the legislature, when everything is decided, you need somebody making the rounds, knocking on the door and saying, remember when you were at that community meeting in Kanabec County? You know, and our rural legislators need to do this. And I think we know that it's a bipartisan thing. We talk about rural Minnesota needing economic development. Broadband is one of the critical pieces for economic development. And so those are my conclusions. I encourage you to participate in that. And so what's good enough? Centrelink sent their regards tonight. Said call them up, and Bob's got all the information for their chief public policy guy. And so I'd encourage you to do that. Always try and work with your providers. And but it's up to you to decide what's good enough for your communities. It's not them who can decide what's good enough. 10 down, 25 down. You know, so that you wouldn't let somebody else decide, Super Value decide whether you should have a grocery store or not, right? So you just the same thing. So that's my presentation. And now we're going to hear more from people who are doing this work in this in the 5 counties. So we have Nancy Hoffman from Chisago, and Janet King from Isanti, Doyle from Kanabec, Pat from Mille Lacs, and Steve from Pine County. You want to come up and, yep. Unless you want to be on the panel too.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
You can go back where I was.
Okay. Anybody need a coffee while they're doing that, raise your hand and I'll deliver.
Can I get a mocha?
So people are working on this issue on your behalf, and they're working smart, they're working hard, and we just need to keep moving. We've seen, in my experience, there's some communities that are just blessed. They jump in, they find a partner, they do the work, they get the grant. 18 months from start to finish, good things have happened. There's other places, it's 5, 6, 7 years before something happens. Some places, it's a little bit here, it's a little bit there, and so on. So, Nancy, why don't you start? Nancy's been a great partner of the Blandon Foundation in Chisago, and prior to that in Benton counties for her work on broadband. So she's a veteran in this.
I've been working with Blandon for a long time on these things, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Blandon Foundation and what a help they were for us. We became a Blandon broadband community in 2016 and 2017. It's a 2-year program. Well, we drug it out a couple years longer, but it's a wonderful program. And as Kevin said, as soon as that hit the paper that we were looking at broadband in Chisago County, the phone starts ringing. They're all calling. I always say that the businesses literally came out of the woods. I did not realize how many businesses we had out in our countryside. So Blandon's been a great partner. Because of them, we did some really cool things like put Wi-Fi on buses in our parks and public spaces. We did some trainings for businesses, quite a few trainings, along with helping them get their sites on Google. We have teleconferencing equipment and just a number of great things we got to do to get people to use the internet more. But the best thing that I think we did that I appreciate the most was our outreach and planning process. And our first thing that we did was we put a survey together. We had almost 900 people respond to this, which is a great response for a survey. If you've ever put them out before, you know how hard it is. What we have here on our brochure, I don't even really use this anymore because we talk about why Chisago County wants high speed, and we need it because we have a ton of telecommuters we have a number of commuters that could telecommute if they had that option. Education is huge. Quality of life, as we talked about, people won't move to your community if you don't have broadband, even if it's just for surfing the net or playing games. And then economic development, 31% of the people said they would start a business if they had better broadband. And I say I don't really use this anymore because I think we all know why we need it. Now we just need to know how to get it there. We also learned a lot, though, from our survey in regards of who the providers are and how satisfied they are with broadband. And so this whole outreach process really helped us understand what the issues were in Chisago County. I had no idea until we did this. And you start to feel like it's really dire. And it's something that if we don't work on this, we're going to get left behind. And we certainly fight enough to try to bring economic development to our counties without having to struggle with that as well. So some of the things that we're working on, we mentioned in the go-around in the beginning, we did receive 2 grants from 2 border-to-border grants, one in Sunrise Township. I might want to talk about a little more later, but it was a real unique project. It was the first with Centrelink like this. We went with special service district bonds because it was only in half of the township. And because it was only in half, they only wanted to charge the residents that would benefit, not the entire township. So it was unique that way as well. But they got it in. There's still a few more homes to finish up with, but I think the stories that I'm hearing are so positive. There's lots of great money saving because of it. Fish Lake Township also applied for a grant, and we're still working on the bonds and things for that, but that project should go in 2019. But what I really learned about working with these 2 communities is that you really need to have township boards that really want to see this happen, as well as residents that get behind it. In both townships, we needed, well, in Sunrise, we had to have 50% of the residents sign a petition saying they wanted it. In Fish Lake Township, we just wanted to know that. The township board wanted to know that they wanted the survey. And we did get 50% of the homeowners to fill one out. They wanted it that bad. So other than those 2 in the Centrelink area, we really have no idea where Centrelink is putting CAF 2. If we could work with them in some other townships, if the townships agree to it, we'd love to do that. But we don't have any idea where the CAF 2 is going in. In the frontier area, which is mostly the southern part of the county, they did put CAF 2 in throughout pretty much the whole frontier area. A lot of the people don't even know they can upgrade. You know, they put it in without really telling anyone. I'm not hearing great things, you know, what's good enough. I don't know that 25.3 or 10.1 really is. We're really hoping that we'll be able to upgrade that somehow in the near future. We are working with a business, Wild Mountain, if you know where that is, pretty secluded area. They have terrible service, and if they want to upgrade, at one point they said it would be $100,000 to bring Frontier out there. They've given us different numbers since. So we're now looking at some wireless options, and we're hoping to bring in some other businesses and maybe even North Branch and possibly the county sheriff's department with the radios. See if we can't work together to get some good broadband out in that area. One other area we're working in, just to finish up, is North Branch. And I mentioned when we went around that it's tough to do when you have so many different providers. In North Branch, and many of our cities, they do have Mid-Continent, and that's pretty good service, and people seem to be very satisfied with it. But how do you reach the people that can't get Mid-Continent? So North Branch is looking at they're holding some meetings. They want to get neighborhoods going. And if they can get the neighbors to say, we would put in $1,000 each, maybe we can get Mid-Continent to get out to their area. So that, in that city, we have to do it neighborhood by neighborhood. But it is, you know, it's township in size, so it's a big area and very rural in many areas. So, so you gotta take many different approaches to try to get this done.
Good. Thanks, Nancy. Yeah, you probably started earlier on this than anyone is Commissioner Hallen, and is one of the leaders of the XMAC group that Mark now leads. But it's because Midco partnered what was a different company before, but now Midco, there's fiber between all the cities that allows all that cable modem activity to happen. Let's hear about Pine County.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, we, you know, several years ago, the schools in East Central Minnesota formed a co-op back in the early 80s, and they did a thing called two-way interactive television. And now kids don't think that's a big deal. I still think it's a big deal, but you can video conference. But it started out as a point-to-point microwave system that the cable company at the time agreed to the franchise agreement. Cities put the pressure on them, and they built this thing. And about a dozen years ago, they needed to upgrade. The cable company did, and the schools needed to, in order to access some federal money, go through an RFP process. And so we did a big proposal, and Midco won the proposal, and that spurred them to put fiber from their Cambridge hub site, which was their hub site at the time, out to all these communities. And I'll tell you, every community now in East Central Minnesota, at their school and public buildings, has as good an internet as there is in America. Really. Your kids going to school are not taking second place to anybody. They got really good service. The problem is, you can stand on the driveway of Pine City High School, and you can look down the road, and my eyes aren't that good, so and you don't have to look very far, and you can see a house sitting there, and I've talked to those people, and they got Zippo. Because Midco doesn't go there, and Centrelink gave up. And it multiplies throughout Pine County. We've got 33 townships in our county, 47, I believe, voting precincts. Virtually none of them have decent enough internet service that if we went to some kind of electronic tabulation system, that a town hall could get that to the courthouse. We've got town halls that have to get in their car and drive to the nearest hill and munch and stand on the trunk of their car almost to call the courthouse if they have an issue with their voting machine. I mean, that's where we live. We've got people that get in their car every day and drive to the cities to work. We can do better than that. And we do terrific job if you're inside the city limits of one of our communities. SCI does a great job in Hinckley and the Sandstone area. We just signed a letter for them last year. They got some grant money to go around the Grindstone Lake because they had a concentration of homes there, and they could see the ROI would work out for them at about, if they had twice the concentration of homes that they had. And Bill, I think you said 8 homes per mile. I think that's ticked up now. That's what they used to tell me all the time. I found them a spot on the north end of Cross Lake where there's more than 8, and they're saying that ROI doesn't work for them. So I think it's 15 maybe now, because construction costs have gone up. But I would say from Pine County, we're frustrated, but hopeful, because I'm an eternal optimist, and I keep thinking, one of these days, one of these journals I read, that WiMAX is going to be the savior, or what were the other ones? You name them. There's a list of 25 different wireless products that have come out in the last dozen years that are gonna say, we don't have to put fiber in the ground. We can do it. We know we're gonna have to get fiber at least to those cells, and did some work in Pine County, and this is Pine County, and that red spot is 5 miles on each side of the freeway. So we had our GIS guys go, 30 grand, but, you know, you're not within 5 miles of the freeway, but I got a plan for you. But, you know, is it unrealistic to say we could pass 100% of every home in Pine County? Because if you add all the road miles in Pine County, you're at 1,600, almost 1,700 miles. And we know what it costs to put a mile of fiber down the road and make a connection. And has anybody ever driven on Rutabaga Road east of Asco? How many mailboxes are on that road? About 17 and 27 miles. So I don't know when they're going to ever plow fiber down Rutabaga Road to get all the way to the Wisconsin border to serve those homes. But maybe we can get something that says, let's start with 65, if we go 10 miles on each side of that freeway. And I think that's possible in a short future, that we could have wireless that would work that far. We can hit 85% of the population, and then if you run out Highway 48 and out east of Sandstone, you can get close to 90%. So I could go on and on, but I worry about the kids in our schools that are sitting alongside of my grandkids, who my grandkids happen to live close enough to town where they got really good service. And they got friends that live a half mile down the road, and they go over to my grandkids' house after school so they can do a project on the internet. Our library is full. Cabin Coffee is a little coffee shop in town, and it's full of college students and high school and elementary students and business people who drive in there and have their morning meeting using the Cabin Coffee internet. Pine Tech is one of the only post-secondary institutions in the Midwest that has what we would refer to as a computer lab. That they need to keep it because they have so many students that come to their school that have to do work that requires the internet, that they can have the nicest computer in the world, but when they go home, it doesn't work. They have no internet service.
Thank you, Steve. Doyle, let's hear about Caneva County.
Part of KBI started in 2011 and tried to advocate for better broadband. In that period of time, we've tried just about everything, including applying for and not receiving the state grant. And the reason for that is we don't have an operator. We have Centrelink as an incumbent, but we have no local operator. And that is huge. As we look around at those people that were successful in those grants, we see a couple of things of commonality. You either have a rural business that can afford it. In other words, rich farmers that use it and can use it and they can afford it. And then they band together, they demand the service, and they get it. You either have a concentration of population or density, or you're fortunate enough to have a local provider that is truly local. Okay? Those are the combinations. And the newest one on is a population that's willing to tax itself. Okay? So, as KBI or Caneva County started up in 2011, we have had progress. That progress has been mostly, though, in awareness and advocacy. The general population as a whole is becoming much more aware of what the influences of broadband, and now, because we're making them our advocates, the legislature are hearing from them. Okay? The local officials are now starting to make it as part of their platforms, as we see, and going forward. And again, they are becoming our advocates. The economic development groups have all picked it up. I think every single economic group I've got has had broadband on, and So, in that regard, there has been progress. In the actual ability to look somebody in the face and say, we've got you something, we haven't. We just haven't. The barriers, again, we talked about the local operator need, or the large incumbent is a barrier. The CAF funds have actually made it worse. What they've done is they've satisfied another portion of the retail base, and as they satisfy them, they take away those dollars that we could bond together to make an economically viable enterprise. So it then becomes an issue of consumer versus commercial. If you look at those numbers of what is broadband, down is consumption, up is production. And if you continue to satisfy the downside, the consumption side, you have no dollars then for the upside to figure out how we can increase the upload time. And again, it divides us. It becomes more of a division. Obviously, you got the urban versus the rural. And even to the extent that we talked about in the little towns that we have within the counties versus the rural outside, the divide continues. Okay? So what was supposed to be the big equalizer in economics, the internet, was supposed to be the big neutralizer, it brought everybody back to the same thing, is now in itself becoming one of the dividing forces. And we need to change that part of it. So from the business point of view, from the economic point of view, I've got two glaring examples. The cost to connect. Even if we can get to the affordability issue, and you can talk about that, or what that is on a month-to-month. In Bram, we were, as a county, we were even promoting the industrial park and making them shovel-ready. And that alone is not enough. They have to be internet-ready. So, I mean, there's a whole new standard. And when they wanted to move and use that lot, they called, and it was $35,000 to connect. And help me out, a mile? Not even a mile. Not even a mile. $35,000 for that business to go into that. And what got that done is the city stepped in and got it done. Okay? We have another enterprise that's in northern Canadian County, is paying $65,000 to be able to connect, to get up to 250 to maintain their business there. Okay? That's a barrier. That's a huge barrier. And those are people that are already here that want to stay here. We're not talking about anything to do with attraction now. Okay? We're just trying to maintain at that level. So it really becomes an affordability issue, not only in the monthly fees that are being paid, but even just to get to the plate. Okay? So this is supposed to be for legislators, right? Right? Here's what we need. We need access to existing fiber. There is fiber that's going down the road. Okay? We need access to it. And what does that mean? And I sit there and I look at CAF money and saying that's federal money. That means I should have access to it. Right? I need the national policy to change so that they have access to CAF money, that somehow or other we can get onto that same fiber network. And that means the law has to change and how it is configured. And right now the big carriers or the big incumbents have a legal position that they can take to block you from doing that. And that needs to change. So I'm calling on all the federal people to sit there and seriously look at what it takes to open up those things. In the telecom world, there was a model where you could have another group come in and get it at wholesale rates. I'm not asking the incumbents to lose money. I'm just asking them to open it up so that we can get onto it. Okay? We still have to come up with the money to connect, but if we did that, then we didn't have to overlay or rebuild or waste a whole bunch of dollars by not connecting to fiber that's already in the ground. Okay? At a local level, the access to fiber also needs to come when we get the grants to say, let's figure out a way to encourage the incumbents that we have to allow us to come on to that as well as part of the grant. Can we use those dollars to buy access? Let me ask it that way. Okay, as one thing. The second one we need is access to capital. The broadband grants are great. They become capital. The grants become capital. But we also need to acknowledge that where that model we don't meet the model, we need to be able to put capital, and that, quite frankly, becomes bonding. Becomes what the political entities have access to is cheap money or cheap loan money, and that we can use that to become available, and that we can use that use those dollars. And in fact, one of the wishes for our big region is that we can go down and become part of the bond request if we could put together a project. And that takes another huge legislative change and political wave to make that happen. And the final one is, and the townships that Nancy talked about are great examples of this, private-public partnerships. There has to be a willingness for private industry to come in and say, we will work with a public entity to get this done. We're breaking great ground, but I think there's more that can be done. And I think the way that you force it is, they have to be threatened. Quite frankly, they have to say, if they're not going to provide access to rural Minnesota, and if the state comes through, we'll monopolize and we'll kick them out. And at that point, then they'll come back to the table, and then I think we'll have some more private. So,
that's our banker on the panel there. Thank you, Doyle. Very nice. Pat, do you want to tell us about Mille Lacs?
Sure, be happy to. Mille Lacs County started off with a very large feasibility study back in 2015, and it provided a lot of options for the county to consider, but none of them were very cost effective. It was an expensive venture for Mille Lacs County, and so we took the remnants of that feasibility study, some of the positives that came out of it, and we worked with a private company that does internet service at Bentonon. They do a lot of work in rural counties. Traverse County has been very successful and received broadband grants as well. And we reached out to them to talk a little bit about what are the assets the county has to help us decide what type of system could work for us. And one of the things that's very obvious with Broadband County, it's a skinny county. 169 runs from Princeton right up to the lake there, very thin county. The topography is very flat. And one of the ideas that was brought up by the firm is to look at a hybrid fiber fixed wireless project. And so we received a grant from Blandon to do a take rate study, a community outreach study, and a tower study. And then we also received some funding to help in public awareness. What was really exciting is, in doing the tower study, is we had a number of towers that literally run up like the backbone on a spine right up the middle of the county, and they're owned, or they have ownership positions by the county. And so we looked at that as an opportunity to again develop a fixed fiber-based system, but using a tower system to provide that type of service. And what we really came up with in our community outreach study is the fact that, and we did a lot of social media work from that grant, did a lot of surveying, but also did a significant amount of direct mailing. Our demographics are such where we have a large population that either doesn't use the internet because they can't, or chooses to use the internet up to a certain level. So the direct mailing fit a certain demographic. The survey emailing also fit a certain demographic. We got a great response. We were very satisfied with the response. And what that response told us is 70% of the people that have internet right now considered it poor. And of that 70%, it was split down the middle. It was either the cost or the bandwidth or both. And so we really felt we had a challenge here, but we had an opportunity because of with the size of the county and the topography we had. So All that culminated into a public-private partnership with Adventon to again produce this type of service. And it culminated into a broadband grant that we submitted for 2017. And this program was going to serve not hundreds of households, but thousands of households and businesses. We removed the city of Princeton and Malacca because of the broadband grant. Created a lot of resistance because of the competition that occurs in those areas. And frankly, those cities have choices. We were really looking at the rural areas and trying to serve those areas. And unfortunately, we didn't receive a grant. We're still trying to understand and learn why we didn't. We felt it was a very competitive application. The state indicated it was a very competitive application. And so we requested back in December some information on the scoring criteria because we were looking at serving thousands of households, and no disrespect to the applicants that did receive funding, they were doing hundreds. And many governments and communities were getting their third or fourth grant. And so we felt it was worthy to ask some additional questions. And so we asked those questions in December. They said they'd get back to us in a few weeks. We're still waiting. And we've done some follow-ups with them. We still consider the state grant an opportunity for us, but we're going to look at some funding. There was going to be a county investment here in this public-private partnership. This project was about $1.8 million, which half was going to come from the grant, the other half from the company and also the county. So we're still there to make that investment, and we really like our project, but we are going to need some help either at the federal or the state level. But we do see it as a real solution for our county. It may not be a solution for different counties that have different topography or a different demographic, but for us, it's a nice fit. And that type of service was going to meet all the governor's requirements. I mean, this wasn't going to be a limited type of bandwidth service. It was going to serve and exceed what the state requirements were. So we're hoping to get some information from the state on how they scored these applications. And like I said, we're not giving up. We'll look at the following year, and we have it number one in our legislative platform for the county. We're also part of the Minnesota Rural Counties, as some of your counties might be. They just voted to make it number one for that group, and certainly it's in a high priority for the Association of Minnesota Counties, as Bill's already mentioned. So we're hoping the legislature will take it seriously and find a solution. I think the one thing that I've observed is with the amount of funding that the state is providing, most of us won't be alive by the time the service gets in place across the state. I hope you live a long life, all of you, but you won't live that long. So there needs to be an additional investment because there is a payback to the state. There is a payback to our government units. And in our county, when you look at what we have in our county, we have some decent retail, a lot of tourism, farm-based businesses. But when you look up at 169, if you ever drive up there, it's a blank canvas. There's things that can happen in that corridor, and that's one thing that we're moving forward right now that we funded is a 169 corridor study. Not surprisingly, it includes infrastructure such as broadband. So that's what I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jana, you guys, Sandy is the newcomers to this broadband discussion. So
Yes,
welcome.
we'd like to acknowledge the Initiative Foundation and as well as the Blandon Foundation for helping Isanti County, and Isanti County also contributed to the funding for the broadband study. It should be ready for release in March, and those of you who are lobbyists will love 23 pages of comments, 6-point font. Looks like this. And it's just kind of commiserate after commiserate. It's really, all kinds of stories, whether somebody's got the story about why the satellite doesn't work or how they have 3 connections or about how they are in the process of moving or they have been considering moving. Pretty compelling personal statements. But in terms of the data, 88% of residents said they need better internet service. 83% of businesses say they need better internet services. 95% of businesses say it's essential to my business. How important will internet service, broadband be to your success over the next 5 years? 88% said very important, 12% said somewhat important, and 0% said it will not be important. Interestingly enough, 75% said redundancy is important to them. It is so critical to have it that they want redundant service. 24% of the businesses said internet service would impact a decision on their part to relocate within the county or outside of the county. And 66% said that limited internet access at employees' residences impact their business. So the businesses are feeling the residential issue as well as their own issues. I'm going to brag on our response rate. We had 12%. That's a typical direct mail is about 4 to 5%. So Isanti County had over 1,600 responses. So this is a very valid survey. And another thing I'd like to summarize is that 60% of the people spend more than $100 a month. That's a lot of money. And we are hopeful that we can use some techniques to capture some of that money locally. So instead of sending it to Centrelink in Louisiana, we are possibly having a local cooperative or some other form of approach that recycles those dollars in our regional or our state economy. Let's see. That's kind of what's happened so far. I think the vision from a technology perspective would be that it is some combination of fiber that gets to towers that are spaced so that there is adequate coverage, and that areas where there are concentrations, possibly around some of the lakes, that there could be fiber to the home. We just sort of have that as sort of the rough sketch out of what a system would look like in the county. There's a need for further detailing to better understand what that means in terms of total capital dollars. The group so far has identified the co-op as the preferred model. That will probably take us a little more time. But a cooperative is a model that's very familiar to rural residents, and in some cases, rural residents may feel better about a co-op than they feel about government. Sorry. I expect there may be some partnerships with townships. We are still trying to explore what this model will look like. I think we've got some pretty interesting prospective partners for a cooperative in Isanti County. Alina Hospital in Cambridge has between 900 and 1,000 employees, and Presbyterian Homes has a major facility there. I looked at Bill's thing about what does $10,000 buy. It'd be about it. Who knows what a nursing home goes for these days per day? I'm 10 years old.
8,000 a month.
8,000 a month. Okay. So in 5 weeks, or in 6 weeks, you could pay for a broadband connection at $12,000. If you can keep grandma out of the nursing home and staying at her home, make it. By the time you bring in-home care services, blah 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 blah, or an alternative service, probably 2 months. And think about that in terms of Medicaid. Think about that in terms of families who are draining their savings. Elena and Pres Homes really deeply believe that telemedicine is important and very important to rural residents. So we are on this journey. We are hopeful, and we have strong support from leadership at the Elena Hospital locally and Pres Homes locally. We need more information. They'll need to make their cases to corporate, but they want to provide leadership on this, and we may have them as institutional investors founding a cooperative. And I think one of the key visions from our county commissioners in the vision for Iceni County is that we don't want one-offs to the extent possible. We want to create a system that will let everybody get in, and we will probably operate more slowly because that vision will be a little more complex organizationally to lay out. But I think that the long-term goal is to avoid the pockets that get served and then nobody beyond gets served.
Good. Thank you so much. Doyle?
To add one other perspectives of, I think Pat started it with saying, down 169, is it enough? I mean, is it big enough? Canadian County, we don't know that we can attract an operator because we don't know that if there was an operator, we think we would know already. So I've got a lot of hope right now in the regional concept that we're going for and it can still be a co-op. I mean, in fact, I kind of believe it will be a co-op, but I think we need to get big enough so that we can attract enough attention from the state, enough attention from the federal, and say we're going to do this for a big enough region. And I think that's another approach that we're looking at seriously and figuring out how to get the mass to make those models work.
One of the reasons I think our commissioners like the co-op model is that it isn't rigid about boundaries. If there's an opportunity, in a township right across where there's a concentration, let's make it work.
Well, we have an agenda, so I fear that would be the end of the agenda, but clearly there's a lot of interest and how to move forward, and you're not going to solve that in a night. So we're going to kind of stick to our agenda because that's just the way my mom raised me. Thank you to our panel. I really appreciate it. Bernadine Jocelyn from the Blandon Foundation has a quote that she always quotes Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. And isn't it a shame there's so much work to be done and that we're the only ones who are going to do it? So that's kind of the whole thing about this initiative here. Susan Morris is County Commissioner in Iceni County and is chair of the president of the Association of Minnesota Counties. And so thanks for your perspective on this initiative.
Welcome. Thank you. First of all, I'd really like to just acknowledge with Janet, the numbers she was giving to you about, what telemedicine, the difference that can make. Both Commissioner Helen and I were just up at East Central Regional, East Central Council on Aging. So many East Central councils on everything, and we just had some real life stories that were given to us about how through the use of technology and keeping elderly people in their homes where they're happiest, where they're healthiest, and where they live the longest, that will make a big difference. And you crunched some great numbers, and we heard some real life stories of people that's happened with. So just like to thank everyone, and especially our legislators, for coming tonight, because these are oftentimes long evenings and require a lot of listening. And so thank you for coming and sharing this. Also, I'm so excited to see so many township folks here tonight too. Thank
you for coming, and of course, county commissioners, and you're always good to see you. And I was recently in Washington, D.C. and spoke with Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith and also Congressman Nolan, and they're very aware of the issue and ready, willing, and wanting to help. So I think I love the whole concept of us all working together if that's what it takes to get this done. We're always partners in local government. We figure it out, right? And that's what I just really see at every level. We are all partners in this, and so thank you for sponsoring this tonight, because I think bringing all the people in one place to have this conversation is really important. What I hope that out of this, what we can move forward with some action items that will really be actionable, and that it won't just end tonight. So I want to thank also the legislature for what they did grant $20 million last year for the border-to-border broadband, but the requests were $50 million. And I think going forward, we're going to see more and more, because you see how we're organizing. You got to know that that's happening all over the state, right? So I think the requests are just going to increase and increase. So the request from the governor's broadband task force, my AMC lobbyist said, please make sure that you, so is that we, the $35 million per year, $70 million per biennium was the request going forward from the governor's task force on broadband. And, but I'm starting to wonder if that's even gonna really cover what we're really talking about here. So a personal story, so we do that redundancy thing. We have Centrelink to our home, and then we also have the Verizon hotspot. And so we have a business, and my husband works for U.S. Bank. He's a system analyst engineer. And then I have a daughter who is an online school teacher. Both of them can work from home. About 2 weeks ago, Sophie was conducting her high school science class, and our main internet, Centrelink, goes down. She switches over to the Verizon hotspot. That's not working. So she throws everything in her car, takes off into town to go to Caribou so she could finish out her school day. Now, for kids, it's probably okay. The teacher got a little disruption, and, it's not the end of the world. It's definitely not professional and, not what she needs to conduct her classroom. But for my husband who works for U.S. Bank, when their ATM system goes down, it's $35,000 a minute that is down. So there's been 5 times this last year he could not get in on the internet to get in to fix the problem. So if he has to drive to town, or worse yet, drive to the office, which is 45 miles away, you just do the math on that, what that costs U.S. Bank to have an employee who cannot connect.
That doesn't look good on the performance review.
Tell them to buy you a new house.
So, and you know what, here's the thing, and I've been told before, well, you just need to live somewhere else. Well, I'm sorry, I live on my great-great-grandfather homesteaded the farm I live on in 1876. I ain't going nowhere. And why should I be forced to live in a town, live in a city, when that's not, I told my husband a long time ago when we first got married, we lived in Dallas, and I said to him, I'm like, you can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl. You got to get me out of this place. They like to challenge you. There is a book that I'm working on reading right now, and it's called The Seventh Sense, and the author is Joshua Cooper Roma. And it's all about networks. So what he talks about is when the Age of Enlightenment came and the Gutenberg Press was created, all of society changed. And then when the Industrial Revolution came along, and that was the next really big change in society. The creation of networks has now given power. It's taken power from the people at the top to now people who want to create havoc on Wall Street in a park can get on Facebook and they can create chaos. So the power is totally shifted. We are in a critical place as leaders to, are we going to figure out how we're going to embrace this power and use it for the good? And I'm going to tell you, you will be highly challenged when you read this book on many levels. We either can bury our head in the sand and get run over by it, or we can really understand what we're dealing with and work with it and see how it's impacting. You've heard all the stories tonight, how it's impacting us. So I once heard an old sage say, "A little luxury, don't you cry, you will be a necessity by and by." So that's what we have with Broadband. It's a necessity.
Thank you so much. Senator, now we've got our legislative perspective. I'm going to call on the senator to lead us off here with just a few minutes. What have you heard? What do you need to do your job to help bring broadband?
I think I've heard more of what we continue. Our demands are growing and growing exponentially every day. When we talk about, the competitive speeds, and, we've seen in the cities, they're going to have 2 and 10 gigabyte service before we even have anything that we consider broadband. It just strengthens our resolve to move forward. I'm happy to hear Isanti and the larger co-op. I think there's some economies of scale that have to occur when we look at the larger communities instead of the one-offs that we're doing today. I like that. I would like to see a couple of the counties, Chisago and all the others, join forces to continue to work to put together a functional, operational plan so we can see what the funding mechanisms are. What is the true cost? We don't have that today, and we need it at least for our regions. I don't want something statewide, and I don't think we can do that. But you have my commitment, and like you said, I said in the beginning, I am one without services, and there's many things that our families don't have. From the entertainment perspective, we talked today, everybody who has slow, expensive service today is missing out on the whole rest of the world from the entertainment dollar, and the entertainment capabilities that are available today. School, we understand the hospital, the medication, medicine, telecommuting, all of those capacities we have to have in the quickest time frame. So,
thank you.
You have my commitment.
It's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of times people say, well, all people do online is watch Netflix. Well, and certainly people do use that for Netflix. That'd be like saying all those people use Highway 169 for go fishing.
Right.
Well, that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I mean, there's a multitude of uses for roads and for internet, and for many of the things we fund. And, so the idea that people use it for entertainment is...
You can hardly be a good consumer today without high-speed internet. There aren't many call centers anymore. Help is online. The instruction manuals are online. Everything is online for every single product you have. And with the change in our economy from an internet sales perspective, brick and mortar is diminishing, and you're doing everything online. So, it's from every facet of our life today.
And, there's probably thousands of people in this region who are earning their living from their home producing. So you're just not consuming, but producing really takes that upload speed. So we'll go to the representative here, because then we'll go back over to the senator.
Well, thank you. This, I think, has by far been the most informative meeting that I've been to on broadband. Listening to the 5 members really has my head going on what some of the things we can do. I really like the co-op idea, and looking in the past where the vast majority of the state grant money has gone has been to co-ops. And the comment earlier about when you have it more localized, there's far more commitment to get it done and get it done right. So I really like that model, and want to work with everybody to see what we can do, to what level this would be, whether it be a county by county thing, or East Central area, and then the other piece brought up the connectivity. dollars are going to put in fiber. It can't be just this company put it in there, the sole access to it. So I know that's more on the federal level, but we do have state grant money too. So I think those are great pieces, and I look forward to working with you guys more to figure out how we make these great ideas happen.
Good, thank you. Senator Laurie?
Yeah, I think a few of the things that I've heard that were really important are, the importance for business, and that we have to keep an eye out too, that it's not just download speeds, it's upload speeds too. Because, I think it was said best when they said, download is consumption, upload is production. And we have a productive community, and we need to unleash that, make sure we don't lose focus on that, so that it's not just the entertainment piece, and the reliability aspect as well. It's key for business in particular. I'm with Steve too. I'm with Steve too, though, that our kids are at a real disadvantage. Yes, our schools have good internet access. My wife is a teacher at East Central, and almost none of the kids go home to homes that have high-speed access. And so much of the learning environment today is through online. And our kids, we can't afford to have our kids at such a significant disadvantage. And it's really important, and I too am really glad to see the townships so engaged, because if we don't get engaged right now, when there's the impetus to make the public investment and to push for it and to make sure that it's border to border, we'll get left out. As soon as those percentages drop to a certain place, we're going to lose the momentum to continue an investment, and the places that are going to be left are the poorest communities with the least homes per mile, and I got to tell you, that's going to be right here. It's going to be, there's a reason, Pine is 82nd and Mabec is 84th in access at the 25-3 level, and so I'm really encouraged to see so many people out here really helping. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we're going to have to lay some cable, and it's going to cost some money, and we have to be there and as a strong partner, but it's also going to take the local communities ready to understand exactly what that looks like in each of our communities in the state. So I just want to thank everybody for coming out, and I'm really encouraged by what we've seen.
Good. Now I'm going to call Rick Olseen from Congressman's office, and
Well, thank you. Doyle and I went a few years ago to an unnamed electric co-op in the region, and they were not very open towards using their lines for running fiber on, or partnering, or expanding their business to a co-op delivering fiber. But I've been to a number of these meetings, and not speaking for the congressman, but it seems to me that the co-op model is a pretty good model for getting broadband out to so many rural areas. And while we were talking, I pulled up Coleman, which is a kind of a quasi-government lending institution that loans to cooperatives, and their assets are probably pretty close to $1 trillion. And so, I'm thinking, looking at Richard Baker over there, he's looking for a job. Why couldn't he put together a co-op for this region? We could get the money from Cobank and really do this. But I'll pass on to the congressman. I have the privilege of, if I'm driving him from the airport to home, it's 3 hours together. So we talk about a lot of things, and I will bring this up. We talk about it a lot. I mean, he understands that the 8th district, that broadband and high-speed connection is very important to the whole district. But I think I'll just, and I got some pictures, so I'll show them. It was a good crowd, and we'll see if we can't do one.
Thank you. Jana, there was in your study there was a number about the revenue. We always talk about how much broadband costs to build, but there was a number that was in their study about how much people pay, the total number of checks people are writing in Isani County for telecommunication services, and it was, it had a B on the end, I think.
Yeah.
1
So
billion in a 30-year time.
What's that?
It's 1.062 billion. Is that what you?
Yeah.
But that's Sandy 30-year estimated expenditure.
But $1 billion, so
Yeah.
a $50 million, $70 million investment, you know, is covered in overtime.
You know, I listen to all this and I wonder, you know, we've taken the people that have good service, they aren't here. And so if we do this in small little chunks, pretty soon we've whittled away at the critical mass. And I'm concerned about that. Because
And that's what Senator Lori's point is, I think, yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna,
One thing that I forgot to add,
All right.
real quick. There is a misperception down at the legislature, myth that comes forward all the time that, well, you know, wireless is actually gonna be fine. We wanna invest in where the puck is going, you know, not where the puck is today. And we need to dispel that myth. I mean, the last segment can be, you know, wireless, but we gotta get cable to, at least to the towers that are, you know, frequently occurring towers.
yeah.
You gotta bury cable, and it's gonna take money, and you need to hit that myth head on with the legislators. I mean, I hear that all the time.
Well, the Minnesota Broadband Coalition website has some great myth-buster
Yeah.
points on it that I encourage you to look at. As well as this new Minnesota Broadband Coalition is producing materials that we'll be sharing with the county association and the township. Health, you know, there's about 30 different groups that have rural in their name that lobby at the legislature. And I keep advocating for buttons that say in broadband too. When they go in and talk about school formulas and broadband, school, you know, because everyone has that. Every industry, manufacturing, healthcare, education, retail, everyone needs the broadband services. I'm going to call on Senator Smith's staff just to give a reflection on what you've heard and.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. So, you know, I've heard a lot about the effect on rural education that this issue has, and candidly today, my wife is going to school at the University of Minnesota for teaching special education, and today, while she came home after her class, our internet went down, and she had to drive 4 blocks to campus. It was like the end of the world in our house. So I can't imagine what it feels like to be one of the students that I hear from, like David Whitworth from USDA down in Cambridge tells me all the time. There are grandparents who are driving their grandkids to, you know, 15, 20 miles to the nearest McDonald's from their school to sit in the parking lot to submit something in their class at 11:30 p.m. so they can meet that midnight deadline.
And teenagers driving too, which is has its negative possibilities.
Yeah, terrifying. And so, over time, and circling back around to my wife, you know, she reports back all the time to me that technology is the future. I mean, this is not something that's going to level off. It's only going to increase the level of technology and the reliance on broadband in the classrooms. And as that happens, if we don't catch up on this issue, the divide between the urban and the rural kids and their opportunities is just going to get wider and wider. And like I said earlier, I'm a range kid, so I have a rural chip on my shoulder and will for my entire life. And so that's very personal. And it's very personal to Senator Smith as well. Some of you may remember when she was Lieutenant Governor Smith, this was a huge issue for her. As Senator, I would say if I had to rank this issue, it would be number 1 for her. And as we're transitioning from looking at this from a statewide perspective to a federal perspective, I gotta tell you, our staff between here in the state and DC, we're really buzzing about this opportunity to kind of come and get this feedback, figure out how we can help from a federal perspective. And we're also really excited when we were watching the State of the Union, the President mentioned that as part of the infrastructure push that he would like to do, broadband is one of them. And I can't tell you how excited we were to hear that, because we think that this is an infrastructure issue. To bring in businesses, we heard it all here today, to bring in businesses, this is something you have to have.
I think think just to add on to that, it's reinforcing what Doyle said. It's one thing to provide money, but you need to do it in the right way so there's maximum positive benefits for those dollars. Chuck, Senator Klobuchar's perspective?
I'll start with, she was one of the founders on the Senate Caucus, a group of folks coming together on that. There's a quote from her in an interview that I actually printed out from a couple of weeks ago. My number one priority is to make sure that any infrastructure bill has broadband in it. What she's been talking about is you're not going to get there with the money that's in USD Rural Development. You're not going to get there with the money, Universal Service Fund, the CAF2 funding. It's going to have to be in the infrastructure, and as many other people are saying here, that there is certainly momentum that internet, the broadband is infrastructure, but it's not shared by everybody. I was at a meeting like this a few weeks ago where there was a state legislator who said, I don't think the state should be putting any money into this. This is a private business thing, and the private market will figure it out. I don't agree with it, and I'm not advocating that, but that idea is still out there. And so that's kind of where the discussion is being formed. My background's in local government. I was a mayor for 12 years before this job, and when I hear county commissioners say that broadband now has passed transportation in the grocery store conversations, I had a good conversation with Gary Peterson from Minnesota Association of Townships. Being a mayor, I know that townships and annexation is a good way to start a good fight. And so I was talking to Gary. Oh, that all starts with annexation. But when Gary said broadband has passed annexation as the number one issue for the Township Association. So you're hearing that true groundswell coming up through the local government folks that they're seeing broadband as that priority.
Yes. Bill, I don't know that it has to be said in this group, but it probably does. We talked about, Senator Bauer talked about dispelling the myths of the small cell technology. It's not going to work for our rural areas. All of the other myths out there in miscommunication, or we as leaders, every single one of us has to have it in our dialogue that this is a top priority for the survival of our communities, and everybody's going to need to play a role in it. We have to do this. Sunrise Township, I think the greatest issue was they had to operate out of a necessity. They had to be reactionary. We need to lead in this so everybody's brought forth, because it's selling this to everybody in our communities. And every single one of us is going to be the one to sell. And so every town board, every city council, and every county board has to put this as the top of the priority. And then we can start to normalize the conversation about how we move forward. It's going to take a little bit from everybody, but this is a necessity.
It's interesting when we hear the survey results, 80%, 90%. What other issue is there where there's that kind of agreement that something is a critical priority? In transportation, it's roads or buses or trains. People want broadband, and it seems like should be a unified rural voice that can help deliver that. Karen?
I have a weird question. But when electricity got brought into the country, was it brought in through cooperatives, or were there private enterprises that were bringing in electricity?
There used to be like battery companies, like we heard about, where people would distribute batteries to people and run things.
Well, generators started out with bringing power out to the rural areas, but then the electric companies then came out to those areas.
And so the places in the 30s, the federal government said everyone should have electricity.
Yep.
And of course, 80% of the people lived in rural areas in the 30s. So that 80% of the vote, thumbs up. Now, there's 10 or 15% of the people who live out in rural countries, much smaller numbers. And so you have to figure, how do we get the political will? When you line up your requests at the state for resources, broadband has to be at the top. So, but the co-op model is the way that the electricity and rural telephone was brought to much of rural Minnesota. And when you look at the rural telephone companies, all those areas I showed that were green on that map in rural areas, 90% of that is through co-ops. Rural telephone cooperatives. They were waiting on who's going to bring us telephone, and no one was. And so they did it themselves. It's just like in Renville and Sibley counties now, they create created a cooperative there, brand new fiber cooperative that now is turning them to that green color as well.
The telephones, though, ran on the electrical lines, correct?
No, not really, no.
No, no.
No. So there are two separate entities. The other thing about the federal government is they set up financing and support mechanisms so that rural electrics, rural telephone companies could survive. So in the old days of long distance telephone, you know, if somebody from Minneapolis was calling up to Bemidji, to a place with a rural telephone cooperative, rural telephone company, the rural telephone co-op was charging Northwestern Bell at that time like 12 cents a minute to connect that call. And so a big source of the revenue for these rural telephone companies was coming from making these connections. So they set up a three-legged stool, the Universal Service Fund that's also on your telephone bill now, this access charges they call them, and then the subscriber dollars to support these phone companies so they could survive over time. Because we know in the Ventura administration, they did a study about the cost of delivering a phone line. Downtown Minneapolis, it was about 30 cents a month to really have a phone in terms of the true cost. There in Reamer, Minnesota, it was $1,100. And you just, how could that be? Well, it's a bunch of gravel roads. It's a bunch of people down 3 miles down a road, and you have an ice storm, and 10 trees fall on somebody's line. How long does it take at $15 a month to pay all those guys to go fix that line? And so, but the idea is that if everyone is connected, then we can be connected and do commerce and have social interaction and all the benefits that come from the network idea that you're talking about. If half the people don't have internet connection, that's half the people that Doyle's Bank can't reach with this e-banking system, or the school can't reach, or the county. If everyone was connected, we could get rid of a lot of printed newsletters, we could get rid of a lot of different redundant systems that now we have to maintain because half the people aren't connected.
Can I just make a comment, trying to link Senator Coleman's comment about being at a meeting recently where legislators who don't think it's a public issue, it's a private issue, and then the money piece of it. And I heard my wealthy neighbor in Isanti talk about $1 billion over 30 years. So Pine County collects about $17 million a year in property taxes. Over that 30 years, that would be $510 billion. So about half. And everybody complains about how expensive property taxes are, right? So the rural areas are paying money for services. There's poor service being provided for that money. And I think to change the dialogue, how is that money more effectively spent? Because we know the market is really good at maximizing the return on investment. It's not necessarily good at equitable distribution of a product or a service. And that, I don't know how to change that conversation, but it seems there's money to spend. We just need to spend it smarter.
And so, example, most of the rural telephone co-ops that are involved in these partnerships say that even with the state broadband grants, they're looking at like a 10-year return on investment for their investment for 50% of a project. So the bigger, if you ask anyone who runs a Fortune 500 company about what stockholders want, shareholders want in terms of return on investment, it's 24 months, it's 36 months. So how do you finance a long-term infrastructure? Right? When you do a special assessment for a road, you don't say, okay, people are going to put a road in front of your house and we're going to make you pay for that over 3 years. It's a 10-year, a 15-year assessment. Economic Development 101, you match the financing to the term of the asset so that you can actually afford to invest. Just like a FHA home loan, right? There's radical stuff when that happened. You didn't need to have 50% down like the bank wanted. Put 5% down, finance your house for 30 years, allowed millions of people to own a home. And this is the same way, term of the asset tied to the financing. So we're over time, and so I want to thank everyone for coming. It was a great conversation. Thanks to the RDC for doing such a great job organizing. And we're going to have Ben just say goodnight. Hey, we know he talks fast, so that's good.
Well, I've been chair for a while, and my colleagues tell me the reason I am is I'm not allowed to talk when I'm chair. I just run fast meetings. Thank you so much. Yes, Steve was on the commission, he knows. Thank you so much for coming. This is such a critical issue, and I'm just so excited to hear possible solutions. And thank you so much for the legislators and the aides coming to represent our community and find out our needs. And I appreciate each one of you making an effort to be here. Thank you so much. So have a safe trip back to your homes.
Take your cookie with you.
And take your cookie with you. And thank you